$1 million. Cash. If this street kid can outplay my pianist. Go on. Somebody get it on video. Sir, he's a child. He wandered into my gala in those shoes. He wants to touch my piano? Then he plays for it. One song. My Julian versus the boy from the gutter. Loser walks out with nothing. I'll play, mister. Oh, he speaks. What's your name, boy? Malachi. And I don't need your money. I just want the piano. 90 seconds. That's all the boy had. 90 seconds on the finest concert grand in Cairo City, in a ballroom full of diamonds and disgust, against a pianist who'd played for kings. 13 years old. Shoes held together with silver tape. A jacket 2 sizes too big that used to belong to a man he never got to meet. He'd never taken a lesson in a real studio. He'd learned on a church upright with 4 dead keys. He'd learned in the dark, after hours, on a piano, an old woman unlocked for him because she said his hands were made for it. Now a tycoon had made him a bet in front of 500 people. Outplay a legend, or be thrown out like trash. The pianist smirked. The crowd raised their glasses. The boy sat down and placed his taped-up shoes on the gold pedals, and then he lifted his hands. What happened in the next 90 seconds emptied every glass in that room and left a billionaire with his mouth hanging open. But first, you have to know how the boy got to that bench. Malachi Turner was born on the 4th floor of a walk-up on Fulton Street, in the part of Cairo City the tour buses didn't drive through. His mother's name was June. She sang, not for money. There was never money. But around the apartment, over the stove, folding the thin gray laundry, June Turner sang like the walls owed her something and she meant to collect. Gospel, mostly. Old songs. Songs her own mother had hummed. Malachi's earliest memory was her voice and her hands. She'd sit him on her lap at the little plastic keyboard somebody left in the building's laundry room, half the keys silent, a crack down the middle, and she'd press his tiny fingers to the plastic and say, "Hear that, baby? That's a note. A note is just a feeling that decided to make a sound." He was 4. He didn't understand it. He never forgot it. There wasn't much in that 4th-floor apartment, but June Turner made it feel like enough. She worked cleaning offices downtown at night, which meant she slept in the afternoons, which meant the best hours of Malachi's whole day were the ones in the evening. Before her shift, when she'd cook something out of almost nothing and hum while she did it and let him bang on that broken laundry room keyboard, she'd hauled up 4 flights of stairs just for him. "You hear how that one's angry?" she'd say when he mashed the keys. "And how this one's sad. Same fingers, baby. Different feeling. That's the whole secret. Anybody can make noise. You make feelings." He didn't have a father he could name. He had June, and June was enough, and June was everything, and June sang. June got sick when Malachi was 6. It was quiet, and it was quick, and it was the kind of sick that doesn't ask your permission or care that a little boy is watching. Near the end, in a room that smelled like medicine and rain, she pulled him close and pressed something into his hand, a key, a brass door key, worn smooth. "When I'm gone," she whispered, "you find a piano, a real one, and you play me something so pretty God has to stop what he's doing and listen. You promise me, Malachi, you play it like it's the last thing you'll ever say." He promised. He was 6 years old, and he promised. He didn't cry at the funeral. Everyone remarked on it. Such a brave little man, but the truth was simpler and sadder than brave. Malachi had already learned, in 6 short years, that crying where people could see you only gave them something to feel sorry about, and feeling sorry was not the same as helping. So he held June's brass key in his fist through the whole service, so tight it left a mark in his palm, and he did his crying later, alone, in the dark, where it belonged to no one but him. After that it was his grandmother, and then it was nobody. His grandmother's heart gave out 2 winters later, and then it was the system. A group home on the east side, beds in a row. A man at a desk, who called the children by their file numbers when he was tired. And he was always tired. Malachi learned to be small. He learned that a boy who takes up no space gets left alone, and being left alone was the closest thing to safe he could find. He didn't cry where they could see. He didn't ask for things. He kept his mother's brass key on a shoelace around his neck, under his shirt, where nobody could take it. The other boys learned fast that the quiet one had a thing he loved, and that a thing you love is a thing that can be taken, so they took it, snatched the key off his neck one night and dangled it and made him beg. Malachi didn't beg. He waited. He waited 3 days, silent, until the boy who'd taken it got bored and careless and left it on a windowsill. And then Malachi took it back, quietly, and tied the knot tighter, and never once let on how much it had cost him to wait. That was the lesson the home taught him. Want nothing where they can see it. Guard what matters. Wait. But you cannot make a boy stop wanting music. So on his own time, in his own quiet way, Malachi began to hunt the city for pianos. Church halls, school gyms, the display models in a music store, where a clerk let him press a few keys before shooing him out. A few notes here, a stolen minute there. It was never enough. He was a thirsty boy with a whole ocean locked behind glass. And then, on a Tuesday, when he was 9, he found the one that wasn't locked. Ebenezer Chapel had closed years back. Congregation too small, roof too broken. But the side door didn't latch right, and inside, under a tarp, in the cold and the dust, sat an old upright piano with 4 dead keys and a middle C that stuck. Malachi lifted the tarp like he was lifting a blanket off something sleeping. He put his hands on the keys, and he played the first thing his fingers found. Clumsy, wrong, beautiful to nobody but him. And somewhere in his chest a door he didn't know was locked, swung open, and for the first time since the room that smelled like medicine and rain, Malachi Turner felt his mother in the room with him. He went back the next day. And the next. Day after day, in the cold basement, teaching himself by ear, working around the dead keys, making the stuck middle C part of the song on purpose. Winter came and the basement got so cold he played in his coat and gloves with the fingertips cut off, his breath fogging in the dark. Spring came and the melted snow dripped through the broken roof, and he learned to move the piano bench to the dry corner. Summer came and the basement turned to an oven, and he played anyway, shirt soaked through, because up in the sanctuary the light came slanting gold through what glass was left in the windows, and down here, alone, he was the only person in the whole world who knew this ruined piano still had a voice. He learned the way hungry people learn, fast, and without mercy on himself. He'd hear a song once on a radio through an open window and spend a week finding it in the keys. He figured out that if you press 2 sad notes together, you get something sadder than either one alone. He figured out that silence, held just long enough, hits harder than any note you could play into it. Nobody taught him these things. He found them the way you find a path in the dark, one careful step at a time, and every step he took, some part of him swore he could feel June in the room. Humming along, that is where Miss Coretta found him. Miss Coretta Vaughn was 78 years old, and she had taught piano in Cairo City for 50 of those years. She'd played for the closed church once, long ago, and she still came by on Sundays to sit in the empty sanctuary and remember. One Sunday she heard something coming up through the floorboards, cracked, unschooled, and unmistakably alive, and she followed it down the basement stairs and found a skinny boy with a shoelace around his neck, making music on a ruined piano. She stood in the doorway a long time before he noticed her. "Child," she finally said, "who taught you to play like that?" Malachi spun around, ready to run. "I wasn't hurting it. I didn't ask if you were hurting it. I asked who taught you." She came closer, her cane tapping the concrete. "Because whoever it was, they taught you the one thing I can't teach. The rest is just practice. But that, she pointed at his hands, that you were born with. Nobody taught me, Malachi said. My mama started me. Then he didn't finish. Miss Coretta looked at him for a long, long moment, and then she sat down on the cold stone steps, folded her hands over the top of her cane, and said the words that would change the whole shape of his life. Well, then I suppose it falls to me. Come here, baby. Let me hear it from the top. And this time, mean it. For 4 years, Miss Coretta Vaughn taught Malachi Turner for free. She had a real piano, a proper old grand, in the front room of her narrow house on the edge of the neighborhood, and she let him come whenever the home would let him out, which wasn't often, so they made every hour count. She taught him to read music, though his ear was already better than most of her paying students would ever be. She taught him the great composers, the dead Europeans, she called them, with a wink, and she taught him that they'd stolen half their best ideas from music that came up out of churches, like the one they practiced under. But mostly she taught him what June Turner had started teaching him on a broken laundry room keyboard. A note is a feeling that made up its mind, Miss Coretta would say. Any fool can hit the key. You have to hit the feeling. You play it like it's the last thing you'll ever get to say to somebody you love, every time. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. Then play, Malachi. And mean it. The lessons were unlike anything a paying student at a fancy studio would ever get, because Miss Coretta taught him backwards from how she'd been taught. She started him not with scales, but with feeling, and only once he could break your heart did she bother making him do it correctly. The dead Europeans, she'd say, laying an old yellowed book of sheet music on the stand with a wink, wrote all this down 400 years ago, and every music school in the world will tell you they invented feeling. They didn't. Half of what makes their best work sing, they borrowed from folks who never got their names in a book, from fields, and churches, from people who made beauty out of having nothing. You come from those people, baby. So when you play these dead men's notes, you play them like you're taking back what was always yours. She was hard on him. She'd stop him mid-phrase. No, you played that. You didn't mean it. Again. She'd make him play a single bar 20 times until the 21st came out true, and then she'd nod. Once, and that single nod was worth more to Malachi than any trophy on earth. Once, a proper competition came to Cairo City. A youth piano contest, real judges, a real stage, a real scholarship for the winner. Miss Coretta wanted to enter him, but there was a fee, and there was a fee for the sheet music, and there was the matter of a group home boy needing permission and a ride and clothes that fit. And in the end, there was simply no money. And the deadline passed, and neither of them ever spoke of it again. But Malachi saw how it sat on her, the one door she couldn't open for him, and he decided privately that one day he'd open a door so big it made up for it. He didn't tell her that either. What he did notice in the last year was that she was getting tired. She'd need to sit before she reached the piano. Her hands, on the cold mornings, took longer to warm. She'd send him home earlier than she used to, waving off his worry. I'm 78, baby, not 7. This is just what 78 sounds like. Now go on and practice that left hand, it's lazy. He grew tall and quiet and kind. He carried Miss Coretta's groceries. He learned to fix the sticky pedal on her old grand. On the shoelace around his neck, he still wore his mother's brass key. And sometimes, when a piece was very hard and very sad, Miss Coretta would see his hand drift up and close around it before he began. He never asked her for anything, which is why, on the night everything changed, he wasn't even supposed to be in that ballroom. The Ardennes Hall was the grandest venue in Cairo City. Gold ceilings, a marble staircase, chandeliers like frozen fireworks. That night it hosted the Rourke Foundation Gala, the biggest charity night of the year, 500 of the richest people in the state in one glittering room. Miss Coretta had been hired to play, not the main act, just the quiet dinner music, in a side salon, the kind of playing rich people talk over and never hear. It didn't pay much, but 78-year-old fingers get cold, and she'd been feeling poorly. And when the night came, she was too weak to make it up the marble stairs. So she sent Malachi, 13 years old, in the too-big jacket that had been her late husband's, to sit in the side salon and play the quiet dinner music in her place. "Keep your head down," she told him. "Play soft, take the money, and come straight home. That world isn't ours, baby. We just visit." He should have listened. But there was a piano in the main ballroom, the finest concert grand in Cairo City. 9 feet of black lacquer and gold, sitting alone on a raised stage under a chandelier, waiting for the famous pianist who'd close the night. And Malachi Turner, who had learned on 4 dead keys in a cold church basement, walked past the side salon he was supposed to play in and stood at the edge of that ballroom and looked at that piano the way a thirsty man looks at water. He only meant to look. He was still looking when Colton Rourke found him. "Stop for 1 second and put yourself in those taped-up shoes. You're 13. You're in the wrong room in a dead man's jacket, and a billionaire is pointing at you, laughing, betting $1 million you'll fail. In front of 500 people who already decided who you are. You could run. Nobody would blame you. Or you could sit down at that piano. Would you run, or would you play? Hold your answer." Because what Malachi did next, most grown men wouldn't dare. Colton Rourke was 51 years old, and worth more money than the neighborhood Malachi grew up in would earn in 100 years. He'd made it in real estate, buying up the cheap parts of Cairo City, tearing them down, building glass towers no one from those blocks could afford. He wore a watch that cost more than Miss Coretta's house, and he was, on this particular night, 4 glasses of champagne into feeling like the most important man alive. He was showing off his prize to a circle of guests when he spotted the boy. The prize was Julian Frost, a concert pianist Rourke had flown in from overseas, all icy elegance and a smile like a locked door, the closing act of the gala. Rourke had paid a fortune for him, and he wanted everyone to know it. "There he is," Rourke was saying. "Julian Frost. Played for 2 presidents and a king. You cannot buy talent like." And then he saw Malachi standing at the edge of the ballroom, staring at the stage. Rourke's smile curdled. "Excuse me." "Hey, hey." He crossed the floor, guests parting around him. "This is a private event. Who let you in here?" He looked the boy up and down. The taped shoes, the enormous jacket, the shoelace at his throat. "Let me guess. Kitchen? Coat check? You lost, kid?" "I was hired to play, sir," Malachi said quietly, "in the side room. I only came to look at the—" "You were hired to play." Rourke laughed and turned to his circle so they could laugh too. This was hired to play the piano, he said it, the way you'd say a dog was hired to fly a plane. "At my gala. Look at his shoes. Somebody's idea of a joke." The circle laughed. Champagne glasses caught the light, and Malachi stood there and took it, the way he'd learned to take things, small and still, keeping his eyes on the floor. But Rourke wasn't done. Men like Rourke are never done while there's an audience. "You know what?" He raised his voice so the whole ballroom could hear. "You want to touch my piano, gutter boy? Fine. Let's make it interesting." He clapped his hands. "Everyone, everyone, we have a challenge. 500 faces he can play. So, $1 million, gasps. Rourke grinned, drunk on it. $1 million cash if this street kid can outplay Julian Frost. 1 song each. My Legend versus the boy in the taped-up shoes. And if he loses, when he loses, he gets thrown out on the street where he belongs, and we all get a good laugh for the papers." "Somebody film it!" The room buzzed. Phones came out. Julian Frost at the piano gave a thin, amused smile and flexed his famous fingers, already certain, and Colton Rourke turned back to the boy, expecting him to cry, or run, or shrink. "Well?" he sneered. "Nothing to say?" Of course not. What would a kid from Fulton Street know about music? The whole ballroom waited for the boy to break. Malachi's hand drifted up to his throat, closed around a small brass key on a shoelace. He thought about a room that smelled like medicine and rain. Play me something so pretty God has to stop and listen. He thought about a cold basement and 4 dead keys. He thought about a 78-year-old woman too weak to climb the stairs tonight, who believed his hands were made for exactly this. He let go of the key. "I'll play," Malachi said. Clear, steady, not a child's voice at all. "And I don't want your money, mister. I told you. I just want the piano." The ballroom went very quiet. Rourke's grin flickered, just for a second, and then he swept his arm toward the stage, mocking, theatrical. "By all means, Julian, show him how it's done first. Let the boy see what he's up against." Julian Frost sat, adjusted his cuffs, and played, and he was good. There was no denying it. He played a glittering, difficult showpiece, fast, flawless, cold as glass. His hands blurred across the keys in runs so fast and so clean they hardly seemed human. Cascade after cascade of perfect notes, each one struck at the exact right instant, with the exact right weight. It was the sound of 30 years of the finest training money could buy. It was dazzling. It was impressive. It was the kind of playing that makes a rich room feel it has gotten what it paid for. Every note perfect. Every note exactly where it was supposed to be. The rich crowd applauded, satisfied. This was what $1,000,000 sounded like. This was what talent from the right side of the world looked like. A woman near Rourke murmured, "The poor child. It's almost cruel." And she meant it kindly. And that was the worst part. Even the kind ones in that room had already decided how this ended. Frost stood, took a small bow, and gestured at the bench with a smile like a slammed door. "Your turn, little man. Do try not to embarrass yourself." Malachi walked up the steps to the stage in his taped-up shoes. He sat down at 9 feet of black lacquer and gold. And Colton Rourke folded his arms, already smirking, already composing the cruel thing he'd say when the boy fell apart. Malachi Turner sat at the finest piano in Caro City, and for a moment he did nothing at all. He just looked at the keys. All of them alive, not one of them dead. He had never in his life sat at a piano where every single key would sing. Then he reached up, one more time, and touched the brass key at his throat, and he began to play. He didn't play a showpiece. He didn't try to outdazzle Julian Frost, because he couldn't, and because Miss Coretta had taught him that dazzle was what you did when you had nothing to say. Malachi had something to say. He played the song his mother used to sing over the stove. He'd carried it in him for 7 years, an old gospel melody, worn smooth like the brass key, and he'd built it up in that cold basement, note by note, until it was something all his own. It started so soft the room had to lean in to hear it. A single line, aching and human, rising up out of the silence like a voice remembering how to speak. And then it grew, not louder, at first, fuller. He added a second line under the melody, a low, walking figure in his left hand, the lazy hand Miss Coretta had scolded, now steady as a heartbeat. And the song began to move, the way a river moves, slow and certain and impossible to stop. The crowd stopped talking. Then the crowd stopped drinking. Phones that had come out to laugh stayed up, but the smirks were gone. A waiter froze mid-step with a tray of champagne and did not move again until it was over. Because there was something in the boy's playing that money cannot buy and lessons cannot teach. And legends like Julian Frost had traded away somewhere on the road to being flawless. There was grief in it, and love, and a broken laundry room keyboard, and a promise made to a dying woman, and 4 dead keys in a cold church, and a whole short life of being told he was nothing. All of it, pouring up out of his hands and into the gold ceiling of the Ardenne Hall. He built it and built it. The melody his mother sang over the stove climbed higher, gathered the whole room up in it, and somewhere in the middle of it, a hard, rich, jeweled crowd that had come to watch a boy fail found itself, instead, remembering things. A woman near the front thought of her own mother, gone 20 years. A grim old man in the third row felt his throat go tight for reasons he couldn't have named. Malachi wasn't just playing notes at them. He was playing them back to themselves. Every loss they'd folded up and put away. Every tender thing this glittering life had trained them to stop feeling. And just when the room thought it could not hold any more, he did the thing that undid them completely. He let the melody stumble. On purpose. He hit a note slightly wrong, the way a stuck middle C had taught him. And for half a second the whole hall held its breath, thinking the boy had finally cracked, that here it came. The failure they'd been promised. And then he caught it, and bent it, and turned the broken note into a blue, aching thing, and folded it back into the melody so that the mistake became the most beautiful moment in the entire song. The wound made into the very reason the music mattered. The way Miss Coretta taught him. The way you make the broken place the point. A woman near the front put her hand over her mouth. A man set down his champagne, untouched. And somewhere at the back, a silver-haired woman in a black gown began, very quietly, to cry. That woman was Delphine Rourke, Colton Rourke's own mother, 80 years old, the heart behind the foundation that bore the family name. She had come up poor herself a long time ago, before the money, and she had not heard anything true in that gilded ballroom in a very long time. And this boy in the taped-up shoes was breaking her heart open with a song her own mother used to hum. Malachi brought it home soft, softer than he'd started. He let the last note hang in the air, and then let it fade, and then lifted his hands, and it was over. For 3 full seconds, the Ardenne Hall was silent. Total silence. 500 of the richest people in the state, and not one of them could make a sound. And then Delphine Rourke stood up. An 80-year-old woman, alone at the back of the room, and she began to clap. And the man beside her stood and clapped, and then the whole ballroom was on its feet. 500 people, roaring, the sound crashing off the gold ceiling. For a boy from Fulton Street in shoes held together with tape, Julian Frost did not clap. Julian Frost stood at the side of the stage, the celebrated legend, and stared at the boy with an expression that started as disbelief and ended slowly as something closer to shame. And then, because whatever else he was a real musician, and a real musician knows. Julian Frost walked to the piano, and in front of everyone, he extended his hand to a 13-year-old, and he bowed his head. "I have never," he said, loud enough for the microphones to catch it, "heard anyone play like that. Not once, not anywhere." He straightened. "You didn't outplay me, son. You outplayed all of us. I'd have paid to hear that." And the ballroom roared again. Colton Rourke stood frozen in the middle of his own gala, in front of 500 people and every phone in the room, with his mouth hanging open and his face gone gray. His bet had a witness. 500 of them. The video was everywhere by morning. A 13-year-old orphan in taped-up shoes, playing a rich man's own guests to tears, and being called the greatest thing a world-famous pianist had ever heard. And right there in the same footage, a billionaire who had pointed at that same boy and called him gutter trash and bet $1 million he'd fail. Caro City had its answer to which of the two was smaller. Rourke tried at first to laugh it off, tried to say it was all in fun. But his own mother put a stop to that. Delphine Rourke was old, but she owned enough of the family foundation to make her voice the last word, and the morning after the gala, she called her son into her study and closed the door. "You made a wager, Colton," she said, "in public, on video in my name. And you lost. Mother, it was a joke. The boy doesn't even want. The boy said he didn't want your money. That is precisely why he is going to get it. Her voice was iron under silk. You will honor your bet. Every dollar. And then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about what this family's name is going to mean from now on. Because it is not going to mean what it meant last night. Not while I'm breathing. Colton Rourke paid the $1 million. But that was the small part. The money didn't go to Colton or to a lawyer or into some scheme. Delphine Rourke made sure of that. It was placed in a trust, in Malachi Turner's name, controlled until he came of age, by the one person the boy trusted in all the world, a 78-year-old piano teacher named Coretta Vaughn. And Delphine did more. She had spent a lifetime funding Gallus that changed nothing. Now, in the last chapter of her life, she funded something real. The Turner Fund, named not for her family, but for the boy and his mother, June, a scholarship program that pulled gifted children out of group homes and dead-end blocks all over Cairo City and put them in front of real teachers and real pianos. Malachi asked for only one condition, and Delphine granted it. Every child in the program would be taught, first, the thing that mattered most, not how to hit the keys, how to hit the feeling. Malachi Turner was admitted on full patronage to the Otway Conservatory, the finest music school in the state, the kind of place that did not open its doors to boys from Fulton Street. He walked in the first day in brand new shoes and a jacket that finally fit, with a brass key on a shoelace under his shirt, where it had always been. And Miss Coretta Vaughn, who had taught for free in a narrow house for 50 years and never once been thanked by anyone who mattered, was given a chair of honor at the conservatory, a title, and a salary, so that in the years she had left, she could do the only thing she'd ever wanted to do: teach children to mean it. She lived to see Malachi's first real recital. Front row, cane across her lap, and when the boys she'd found in a cold basement walked out onto a real stage, under real lights, and sat down at a piano where every was alive, he found her face in the front row before he played a single note. He played for her that night. Everyone in the hall thought he was playing for them, and the critics the next day used words like prodigy and once in a generation, but Malachi Turner was playing for one 79-year-old woman in the front row who had climbed down a set of basement stairs once to follow a sound coming up through the floorboards. When he finished, the hall rose to its feet, and Malachi stood and bowed. And then he did something no one expected. He walked down off the stage, crossed to the front row, and knelt in front of Miss Coretta Vaughn and took her old hands in his and pressed them to his forehead. The way you honor an elder, the way you thank someone for your whole life. The hall came apart. There wasn't a dry eye in it. Miss Coretta leaned close, so only he could hear over the roar. You meant it, she whispered. Every note. I heard it, baby. You meant it. You taught me how, he said. No. She squeezed his hands. I taught you where the keys were. The meaning was always yours. It was your mama's. You just had to grow big enough to let it out. She smiled that old, knowing smile. She heard that too, you know. Wherever she is, God stopped what he was doing. I'd bet my life on it. And Colton Rourke? He didn't go to prison. There was no crime, just cruelty, and cruelty isn't jailed, only remembered. But the video followed him. Deals dried up. Investors stopped returning his calls. The city that had once flattered him now looked at him and saw the man from the tape, the billionaire who pointed at an orphan and bet $1 million he was worthless. His name, the name he'd spent his whole life gilding, became a punchline told at the very parties he used to host. His mother, before she passed, gave him one path back to something like dignity. And to his small credit, he took it. He wrote a check every year to the Turner Fund. Quietly, no cameras, no press release, and he never once asked for thanks, because he had finally, painfully understood that he hadn't earned any. Some men learn late, but some do learn. On the night of that first recital, Malachi Turner sat down at the piano and touched the brass key at his throat and looked up at the balcony, past the lights, the way his mother taught him. Play me something so pretty, God has to stop what he's doing and listen. He closed his eyes and he played it like it was the last thing he'd ever say. Before you go, I want to leave you with one question. How many kids like Malachi are out there right now? In a cold basement, at a broken keyboard, carrying something extraordinary that the world has already decided isn't worth a second look? What would it cost you? A moment, a kindness, an unlocked door, to be somebody's Miss Coretta. If this story moved you, do 3 quick things for me. Drop a comment and tell me who saw something in you before you could see it in yourself. I read every single one. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder that talent doesn't care what part of town you're from. And subscribe and tap that notification bell so the next story finds its way to you. Because the world is full of people with $1 million. It is starving for people who can make you feel something. And that boy in the taped-up shoes had them both beat.